Imagine discovering that the two people you trust most, your wife and your own brother, are hiding the ultimate betrayal. This is the story of how I exposed their secret and left them both with nothing. I'll never forget the first moment I felt it, that quiet, unsettling feeling that something was off. It was the kind of instinct that comes not from anything obvious, but from the tiniest details that only stand out after years of knowing someone. My wife, Claire, had always been warm and open, a partner I trusted completely. But in recent weeks, things had changed. It was nothing blatant, just subtle shifts. She'd started spending more time out, saying she needed to clear her head or get some fresh air. And when she was home, she seemed distant, as if her thoughts were 1,000 miles away. I tried to brush it off. Relationships have ups and downs, right? But deep down, the tension gnawed at me. It was around this same time that my younger brother, Jake, had been coming around more. Jake was 5 years younger than me, a bit of a free spirit, the kind of guy who could charm anyone he met. He'd had his fair share of struggles over the years, and I'd always been there to help him pick up the pieces. So, when he started showing up more often, I didn't think anything of it. Family is family. I was glad to be there for him, to give him a safe space. But the more time he spent around us, the more I noticed Claire's behavior shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to believe it, but that strange feeling only grew stronger. It was a Friday night, and Jake had come over for dinner. We sat around the table, laughing, drinking, catching up like old times. But something felt different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Claire seemed more animated than usual, her laughter coming a bit too easily, her glances at Jake lingering a bit too long. I told myself I was just imagining it, that I was being paranoid. After dinner, Claire excused herself to get more wine from the kitchen, and I noticed Jake's eyes follow her as she walked away. It was just for a split second, but it was enough to make my heart pound. I shook it off, reminding myself that he was my brother and she was my wife. They were just family, nothing more. But then, other things started adding up. I'd catch her on her phone late at night, her face glowing in the dark as she quickly swiped out of her messages when I walked in. Once, she even laughed at something she was reading, only to stop abruptly when she saw me. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was just a silly group chat with her friends. I tried to ignore the tension, telling myself it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right under my nose. A few nights later, Claire told me she was going out to catch up with some friends. She'd been distant lately, so I encouraged her to go. I thought maybe she just needed a break, some time to unwind. But when she came home hours later, I could tell something was different. Her hair was tousled, her shirt slightly wrinkled, and she had that carefree look she used to have when we first started dating. "Did you have a good time?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though a knot was tightening in my stomach. She nodded, almost too eagerly. "Yeah, it was refreshing," she said, giving me a smile that felt off. It wasn't her usual smile, it was something more guarded, as if she were hiding something behind it. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying the evening in my head. The way she'd looked when she came home, the strange, almost guilty way she'd answered my questions. I tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to my imagination, but a nagging thought kept pulling me back. The next day, I casually asked if she'd seen Jake recently. Her response was immediate, almost rehearsed. "No, why would I?" she replied, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, maybe even guilt. I didn't press further, but from that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore the strange pieces falling into place. A week passed, and I did my best to keep things normal. I focused on work, tried to stay busy, and pushed aside the gnawing suspicion growing in the back of my mind. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of Claire on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, her face lit up with a slight smile or an unreadable expression. Then, one night, as she was in the shower, she left her phone on the bedside table, lighting up with a notification. I glanced over, telling myself I shouldn't snoop, but the curiosity was too much. I picked up her phone, my heart pounding, and saw a message from Jake. It was short, almost innocent, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I stood there, frozen, the words burning into my mind. Last night. Amazing. I tried to find an explanation, some reason why my brother would text my wife something like that. But no matter how I twisted it, there was no other conclusion. I put her phone back down before she could catch me, my hands shaking. When she stepped out of the shower, smiling and relaxed, I could barely look at her. She noticed, of course, and asked if I was all right. I forced a smile, told her I was just tired, and watched as she climbed into bed beside me, oblivious to the storm that had started to build inside me. I knew I couldn't confront Claire just yet. We had a party planned for the weekend, something we'd been organizing for weeks. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone we knew would be there. It wasn't the time to create a scene or air out what was happening between us. So I buried the anger, the confusion, and the heartache, and I forced myself to go through the motions. The next few days were filled with preparations. Claire was bustling around, cleaning the house, preparing food, calling people to confirm details. She acted completely normal, maybe even a bit more affectionate than usual, as if nothing was wrong. Part of me wanted to scream, to shove that message in her face and demand answers. But I kept my silence, telling myself I'd wait until after the party, when we were alone, to finally confront her about what I'd found. My younger brother, Jake, was, of course, on the guest list. The thought of seeing him made my stomach turn, but I knew I couldn't cancel on him without raising suspicions. And to complicate things further, he was staying overnight after the party, something we'd planned long before any of this started. The night before the party, Claire and I sat together in the living room, going over the final details. She laughed as we sorted out the last of the supplies, her face lighting up with a joy that almost made me believe nothing was wrong. It was disarming, seeing her like that. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing, that I was being paranoid, but the memory of that text kept pulling me back to reality. As we finished up, I made myself a promise. After the party, after everyone had left, I would finally get the answers I needed, no more secrets, no more pretending. I'd let them enjoy the party, let them think they'd pulled it off. And then, when they least expected it, I'd confront them both. The day of the party finally arrived, and work had run longer than I expected. I was restless all day, caught between dreading the night ahead and feeling a grim sense of purpose. Claire had texted me earlier, asking when I'd be home, and I told her I'd be there in half an hour. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was already buzzing with life. I could hear laughter and music spilling out from the backyard. A few guests were mingling on the porch, holding drinks and laughing, and I forced myself to put on a smile as I walked past them, heading inside. Claire greeted me in the entryway, a relieved smile on her face. She was radiant, dressed up for the party, looking every bit like the perfect hostess. For a moment, I felt a pang of something familiar, a memory of the woman I used to know, the one I trusted completely. But then I remembered the text from Jake, and the feeling evaporated as quickly as it had come. "You're finally here," she said, giving me a quick hug. "Everyone's been asking about you. I've got drinks set up in the backyard, and I think Jake's already started the grill." At the mention of Jake, my jaw clenched involuntarily, but I kept my expression neutral. "Sounds good," I replied, giving her a tight smile. "I'll go say hi to everyone." She nodded, then slipped back into hostess mode, seamlessly gliding around the room to greet guests and make sure everything was perfect. I watched her for a moment, marveling at how effortless it all seemed for her, how completely she could pretend nothing was wrong. I made my way to the backyard, where a crowd had gathered around the grill. And there was Jake, flipping burgers, laughing with a group of friends as if he hadn't sent that message to my wife, as if everything between us was perfectly normal. He looked up when he saw me, grinning. "About time you showed up," he called, holding up a beer. "Grab a drink and relax, big bro." I forced a smile, raising my hand in a casual wave, but my mind was racing. Tonight, I'd let them play their parts, let them feel safe. But with each passing hour, I was only more certain of one thing: this party would be their last act. The party was in full swing, laughter and music filling the house as friends and family chatted, drank, and shared stories. For a brief moment, I started to relax, letting myself get swept up in the energy. I was still determined to confront Claire and Jake, but I'd promised myself I'd wait until after everyone had gone. Until then, I would play along. Then, just as people were settling in, Claire walked to the center of the room, holding her glass high. She tapped it gently with a spoon, the soft chime grabbing everyone's attention. The room fell quiet, and she looked around, her gaze finally landing on me with a warm smile. "I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for being here," she said, her voice filled with an energy that seemed to light up the room. "And, since we're all together tonight, I thought this would be the perfect time to share some news with all of you." I felt my heart skip, wondering what she was about to say. She looked at me, her eyes shining, and then, with a wide smile, she announced, "We're having a baby." A ripple of gasps and applause filled the room as everyone cheered, clapping and congratulating us. I was frozen in shock, staring at her as the words sunk in. A baby. She was pregnant. For a moment, everything I'd been thinking, all my suspicions, my anger, it all evaporated, replaced by a feeling of pure, overwhelming joy. I looked at her, stunned, and she took a step closer to me, her face beaming. Suddenly, all the doubt, the betrayal, seemed to disappear, and I found myself wrapping my arms around her, holding her close. The idea of becoming a father filled me with a happiness I hadn't felt in so long, and for that one moment, it was as if nothing else mattered. Our friends clapped, cheering us on, congratulating us. I looked at her, feeling a surge of warmth and hope that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. But as the applause faded, my gaze drifted over her shoulder, landing on Jake. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, his expression tense, a strange look in his eyes that made my stomach twist. In that moment, the joy started to fade, the realization sinking back in with a sickening clarity. My mind was reeling, torn between the elation of the news and the chilling doubts I'd been harboring. As the congratulations continued around us, I felt trapped in a surreal nightmare, caught between hope and the terrible truth that lay just beneath the surface. After the party wound down and the last of the guests trickled out, Claire and I sat together in the quiet house, wrapped in a moment of peaceful exhaustion. She seemed so happy, so genuinely excited about the future, and for a while, I allowed myself to get swept up in the dream she painted, a new life, a new beginning for us, a child on the way. But over the following week, a strange tension crept in. I tried to shake it, to focus on preparing for the baby, helping Claire clear out a room for the nursery, researching everything from cribs to strollers, even making sure the house was in order for this next phase of life. Yet, the lingering doubts from before kept returning, gnawing at me, filling me with an anxiety I couldn't explain away. Claire was out at work most of the week, and I noticed she started getting more protective of her phone again, often taking it with her even around the house. Every time I tried to dismiss my concerns, those memories would flood back, the text from Jake, the secret glances, the excuses. Despite the joy of preparing for a baby, that trust had been fractured, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. On the last day of that week, while Claire was at work, I decided I needed to know the truth for my own peace of mind. With my heart pounding and a tightness in my chest, I went to a security store and picked up a few discreet cameras. I planned to set them up in key spots, our living room, the hallway, and, though it pained me, in our bedroom. If there was nothing to find, I'd know I'd been paranoid, and we could move forward with a clear conscience. But if there was something to uncover, I needed to know for sure. I worked quickly, positioning the cameras carefully so they'd catch everything but remain hidden. By the time I finished, the house looked just as it had before, and there was no sign of anything unusual. Now, all I had to do was wait and hope that my instincts were wrong. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. A few days after I'd set up the cameras, Claire came to me with a bright, excited look in her eyes. She sat down beside me, her hands resting on her stomach, and with a smile that seemed to light up the room, she said, "I think it's time we find out the sex of the baby. Let's have a little party, just family and a few close friends. It'll be a perfect way to share the news." For a moment, the doubts I'd been harboring seemed to fade. Her excitement was infectious, and I found myself nodding, agreeing almost on instinct. "That sounds like a great idea," I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. "Let's do it." The following days were a flurry of activity, with both of us diving into the planning. We brainstormed everything: balloons, cupcakes with pink and blue icing, a cake that would reveal the baby's gender when we cut into it. Claire was in her element, planning every detail down to the decorations and music. Her joy seemed genuine, and for a moment, I almost believed we were in this together, that we could move past my suspicions and focus on the life we were building. As we set up the decorations, I helped her hang streamers and blow up balloons, doing my best to stay present, to be there for her and share in the joy. But in the back of my mind, the doubts lingered. The cameras were in place, silently recording, and every time I thought of them, my heart would race with a mix of dread and anticipation. I kept telling myself that this party would be another distraction, something to keep my mind off the darkness brewing beneath the surface. The day before the reveal, Claire brought home a cake she'd had custom-made, with a layer of frosting concealing the color inside. She was beaming as she showed it to me, talking about how our friends and family would react, how excited she was to share this moment. I nodded along, keeping my smile steady, but inside, I knew that after this party, I couldn't keep pretending. The cameras were set. I was ready for whatever truth they'd reveal. And after the party, after the balloons had been popped and the cake had been cut, I'd finally get my answers. The day of the gender reveal party finally arrived. I was up early, setting up the last of the decorations, checking the cameras one more time to make sure everything was in place. My heart was a chaotic mix of excitement and dread, knowing that today would bring more than just news of our baby's gender. Jake, my younger brother, was the first to arrive. He came in with his usual casual grin, carrying a cooler and greeting me with a playful slap on the back. "Hey, big bro," he said, nodding toward the backyard. "Thought I'd get the grill going. Gotta make sure there's good food for this big moment." I watched him head out to the grill, a slight tension building as I noticed he didn't wait for any instructions or offer to help with setup, he just took over. It was something he'd done plenty of times before, but today it felt different, almost territorial. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. More guests started trickling in, and my attention was pulled from one person to the next, shaking hands, hugging relatives, and exchanging pleasantries. Everyone seemed thrilled to be here, celebrating the next chapter in our lives. But amid the small talk and laughter, I kept noticing that Claire was nowhere in sight. She'd been so excited to host, to reveal this news, yet now she was missing. I scanned the room and the backyard but told myself not to worry. Maybe she was getting ready, making sure everything was perfect for the reveal. I turned my focus back to the guests, moving through the crowd and making small talk. Jake, meanwhile, was manning the grill with ease, chatting and laughing with our family as if everything were completely normal. The minutes ticked by, and the unease I'd pushed down started creeping back. Where was Claire? The party was in full swing, and after greeting more guests, I glanced over at the grill. That's when I noticed it wasn't Jake standing there anymore, it was my friend, Kevin, flipping burgers and chatting with a few relatives nearby. My heart sank a little. Jake was nowhere in sight, and neither was Claire. Trying to stay calm, I slipped away from the group and started looking for her. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe she'd gone inside to take a breather or grab something for the party. But the thoughts kept nagging at me, the doubts that wouldn't let go. I moved through the house, glancing down the hall, and then I saw her. She was just coming out of the bathroom, straightening herself up, a faint flush in her cheeks. When she saw me, she gave me a tired smile. "Oh, nightmare," she said with a half-laugh. "Toxicosis is really getting to me, but I feel better now. Let's get back to everyone." I forced a smile, nodding as I tried to shake off the suspicion. "Yeah, sure. Glad you're feeling better." She slipped her arm around mine, guiding us back out to the yard where everyone was waiting, eager for the reveal. Despite my doubts, there was something about her excitement that felt real, grounding. For a brief moment, the tension faded. The cake was brought out, decorated with the same pink and blue theme that had colored the rest of the party. With everyone gathered around, we cut into the cake together. As we pulled the knife out, a bright pink layer was revealed. The crowd cheered. It was a girl. Claire's face lit up, and I found myself genuinely smiling too, momentarily lost in the happiness of the moment. Friends and family crowded around us, offering hugs and congratulations. I held Claire close, doing my best to push aside the doubts for the sake of our daughter. But as the party continued, that nagging feeling crept back. Every glance exchanged between Claire and Jake seemed a little too natural, every laugh too comfortable. When Claire went off to chat with some friends, I slipped inside the house. My heart pounded as I headed into my office to check the cameras. This would be the moment I'd finally know if I'd been paranoid, or if my worst fears were true. Taking a deep breath, I opened the camera feed. I clicked through the camera feed, skipping through scenes of our empty living room, the backyard filling up with guests, and then the hallway leading to the bathroom. And there it was, a moment that made my heart drop. The camera showed Claire pulling Jake into the hallway just as guests were arriving. They looked around quickly, making sure no one was watching, then disappeared down the hall and into our bedroom. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I scrubbed through the footage, watching as they closed the door, leaving no doubt about what was happening inside. For the next few minutes, all I could do was stare, numb, watching as my wife and my own brother betrayed me in my own home, while I was outside greeting our friends and family. I sat there, frozen in shock. 1,000 emotions crashed over me, rage, disbelief, pain, but as the minutes ticked by, shock started to transform into something else. Cold determination. I knew I couldn't confront them here, not in front of everyone. No, this was going to be more than a confrontation. They had to feel the full weight of what they'd done. An idea started forming in my mind, one that made my heart race. I took a few more minutes to collect myself, rehearsing each step in my head, knowing exactly how I would get my revenge. I'd let them think they'd gotten away with it, let them feel secure. But once the time was right, I'd pull the rug out from under both of them in a way they'd never forget. Steeling myself, I closed the laptop, wiped any hint of shock from my face, and returned to the party. They wouldn't know what was coming, but I did. And I'd make sure that when the truth came out, they'd lose everything. I grabbed a flash drive and a portable spotlight from my office, my hands steady as I set everything up. My heart raced, but my mind was clear. I was ready to turn my pain into a revelation they'd never forget. As I stepped outside, I called out to the crowd, "Hey everyone. Thank you all for coming to celebrate this special day with us." I forced a smile, feeling the eyes of our family and friends on me, watching with warmth and curiosity. Claire, oblivious, smiled back at me, her face lit up with excitement. Even Jake was standing there, a drink in hand, looking as relaxed as ever. I held up the flash drive, looking directly at Claire. "I have a special gift prepared for tonight, something for all of you to see, especially my beautiful wife," I said, my voice steady. I noticed a few people exchange glances, intrigued, and Claire tilted her head, a slight blush creeping up as if I'd planned some romantic gesture. I connected the flash drive to the projector I'd set up, the spotlight casting a bright glow onto the screen I'd pulled out. "I just need a second," I said, pretending to fiddle with the setup as I ensured everyone was present. I wanted every last guest, every relative, every friend to witness this. Finally, I turned to the crowd. "All right, everyone, here it is," I announced, my voice filled with a quiet intensity. "A memory from today that's unforgettable." I hit play. The screen flickered to life, and in an instant, the mood shifted. There they were, my wife and my brother, sneaking down the hallway, slipping into our bedroom with guilty looks. Gasps filled the air as the footage continued, the truth revealing itself in graphic detail. Claire's face went pale, her eyes widening in horror as she realized what was playing in front of everyone. Jake stood frozen, his face drained of color, his drink slipping from his hand and shattering on the patio. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence as everyone watched the betrayal unfold, the reality settling in. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, her face contorting in shock and humiliation, her eyes darting around at the stunned expressions of friends and family. "What? How could you?" she stammered, but her voice was drowned out by the whispers and shocked exclamations filling the air. I held up my hand, silencing her. "No, Claire," I said, my voice cold, cutting through the noise. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify. This is who you are. And now, everyone here knows." Jake looked down, unable to meet my eyes, but I wasn't done. "This was supposed to be a celebration," I continued, looking around at our guests, "but I figured, why not show everyone the real you both?" And with that, I walked away, leaving them to face the wreckage they'd caused. As I walked away from the scene, the stunned silence behind me was quickly broken by whispers and gasps. But then, a sudden shout rang out from the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. I turned back, half expecting chaos, and hurried to see what was happening. When I got closer, I saw my friend Kevin standing over Jake, fists clenched, fury in his eyes. Jake was on the floor, holding his jaw, his face a mix of shock and anger. Kevin must have snapped after watching the footage, unable to hold back. He was one of my oldest friends, practically a brother to me, and seeing him defend me so fiercely hit me hard. I quickly stepped in, grabbing Kevin by the shoulder. "Hey, let's leave it," I said, pulling him back, feeling the tightness in my own chest loosen slightly. "He's not worth it. None of this is." Kevin took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing a little. "I'm sorry, man," he muttered, shaking his head. "I just couldn't stand there and do nothing." I patted him on the back, feeling grateful for his loyalty. "I appreciate it. But trust me, he's already lost more than he realizes." We walked out of the room, leaving Jake there, humiliated, bruised, and exposed for the whole crowd to see. Claire was nowhere in sight, she must have fled the room, unable to face the crowd's judgment. The guests were still gathered outside, whispering in tight circles, and a few even shot glances in my direction, nodding with quiet support or shaking their heads in disbelief. Someone muttered a harsh word about Claire, but it barely registered. I looked around at the faces, people who'd come to celebrate the start of a new chapter, now left with the ugly truth of what had really been going on. But I felt nothing. The betrayal, the anger, the hurt, they had been laid bare for everyone, and I was done. With Kevin at my side, I walked away from it all, finally feeling free from the weight I'd been carrying. The morning after the party, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Tom. He'd been handling our family's legal matters for years, so he knew the situation was serious even before I'd spoken a word. "Tom, I want you to prepare everything for the divorce," I said, my voice cold and steady. "And I need you to make sure that Claire walks away with absolutely nothing." Tom paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle. "Understood. But, before we proceed to trial, we should do a paternity test. If she's claiming this child is yours, we need to establish the facts and attach this documentation to the case. It'll strengthen our position and prevent any delays." I clenched my jaw, taking in his words. The thought of a paternity test made my stomach turn, but I knew he was right. I had to know if I was connected to this child or if it was just another piece of her deception. Okay, I replied shortly, ending the call. Without hesitation, I stormed through the house, tracking down Claire. She looked up as I approached, her face a mix of fear and residual shame, but I didn't say a word. I grabbed her arm firmly, and she stumbled to keep up as I led her out of the house, straight to the car. Her protests started, but I cut them off with silence, my grip on the wheel tightening as I drove. We didn't exchange a single word as I took her to the clinic, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging thick in the air. She must have known why we were going, but she sat silently, eyes wide with anxiety, glancing at me every so often, searching for an explanation I refused to give. The time for explanations had long passed. I parked in front of the clinic, threw the car into park, and turned to her, my gaze hard and unyielding. "We're doing a paternity test," I said, my voice cold. "And that's it?" She nodded, the look of betrayal in her eyes now directed back at herself. I got out, not waiting for her response, and headed inside, ready to confront whatever the truth would reveal. After collecting the materials for the paternity test, I returned home, the weight of the entire situation bearing down on me. As I stepped inside, the silence in the house was suffocating. I knew the results of that test would soon confirm the truth, one way or another. But even now, I could no longer stand the sight of her in the house, as if nothing had changed. I found Claire in the living room, sitting with her arms crossed, looking tense. "Pack your things," I said, my voice flat and unwavering. "Leave the house until the trial is over." She looked up at me, her face twisting with frustration and defiance. "This is my house too," she shot back, her voice cold. "I have as much right to be here as you do. I'll leave, but only when the court decides. Until then, I'm staying, and I don't want to see you any more than you want to see me." I felt a flare of anger but forced myself to stay composed. "Fine," I said, my tone low and controlled. "Stay here if you need to. But don't forget that everyone knows what you've done. And when the results come back, it'll be clear that you have no place here." Her face fell slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her eyes, but she quickly hid it behind a mask of cold indifference. "Let the court decide, then," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the hollow silence of the house. I knew that, soon enough, there would be no place left for her in my life. All I had to do was wait for the final confirmation, and this nightmare would be over. The day of the trial finally arrived, and the tension was unbearable. My lawyer, Tom, had prepared meticulously, organizing every piece of evidence to ensure nothing was left open to interpretation. We entered the courtroom, Tom carrying the stack of documents that laid out Claire's betrayal in stark detail, as well as the sealed paternity test envelope bearing the hospital's official seal. Claire sat across from me, her face calm, her posture relaxed. She held herself with a confidence that was infuriating. She was convinced she'd walk out of here with half of everything, convinced she could spin her way out of the mess she'd created. I glanced at her, marveling at how well she hid her guilt behind that polished, composed expression. But I knew the truth. And soon, so would everyone else in the room. Tom began by laying out the facts for the judge. He presented the video footage, the incriminating messages, every last detail that documented the extent of her infidelity. The judge's expression remained impassive, but there was a slight tightening around his mouth as the evidence piled up, revealing the extent of the deception. Finally, it came time for the paternity test results. Tom walked to the judge's bench, the sealed envelope in his hand, and placed it down with careful precision. "Your Honor, this envelope contains the results of a paternity test, conducted and sealed by the hospital," he said. "We have left it unopened, to avoid any accusations of tampering or falsification." The judge nodded and picked up the envelope, breaking the seal with deliberate slowness. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on that small piece of paper, and I could feel my heart pounding as the seconds dragged on. Claire, meanwhile, looked utterly composed, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. The judge scanned the contents of the test, his face giving nothing away. Then he looked up, his gaze shifting to Claire. The results of this paternity test confirmed that the child Mrs. Anderson is carrying is not Mr. Anderson's, he announced, his voice echoing through the room. For a brief moment, the silence was absolute. Claire's confident expression faltered, her face paling as the words registered. She glanced around, her composure crumbling as she tried to process what had just been revealed. Whispers rippled through the courtroom, and I could feel a mixture of relief and anger rising within me. Finally, the truth was out, undeniable and inescapable. The judge turned back to my lawyer. Based on the evidence presented here today, the court finds Mrs. Anderson in breach of her prenuptial agreement due to infidelity. As such, she is not entitled to any portion of Mr. Anderson's assets. Claire's face contorted, disbelief and fury flashing across her eyes. Her once perfect facade was shattered, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She opened her mouth to protest, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. "This ruling is final," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. I sat there, watching her with a strange sense of detachment. She'd played her game, confident she could keep everything hidden. But now, she was leaving this courtroom with nothing, just the consequences of her own choices. As I rose to leave, I felt a weight lift, knowing this chapter was finally over. When I got home after the trial, Claire was there, sitting in the living room, looking shaken and defeated. But I had no sympathy left for her. The sight of her filled me with anger, and I didn't bother to hold back. "Pack your things," I said coldly, my voice echoing through the quiet house. "You're leaving. This is my home, and you have no place here anymore." She looked up at me, her face pale, opening her mouth as if to say something, but I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, hearing the soft sounds of her hurried footsteps as she gathered her things, leaving me alone in the empty silence that followed. The first few days were a blur, my mind and heart raw from everything that had unfolded. But slowly, bit by bit, I started to come back to myself. My friends and family rallied around me, offering their support, their encouragement, and their loyalty in ways that made me feel less alone. Kevin, the friend who had been there at the party, stood by me every step of the way, reminding me I still had people I could trust. It was about a week later when I heard the news about Jake. After the trial, he'd packed up and left town, unable to bear the fallout at home. Our parents had been relentless, confronting him for what he'd done, their disappointment and anger making it impossible for him to stay under the same roof. They'd raised us to stand by family, to protect each other, and Jake had shattered that trust in the worst way. Rumor had it he'd left for another city, cutting off contact for now. He'd burned bridges with everyone who mattered. As for Claire's child, whether it was Jake's or someone else's, I didn't care. She had lied, betrayed me, and shown me exactly who she was. Her child's father could be anyone, and in the end, it was her problem to deal with. Standing in that empty house, I took a deep breath, feeling a strange, bittersweet relief. I had faced the truth, taken back my life, and shed the weight of people who never truly valued me. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was finally free to move forward, without them.